Good evening, members. I'm Councillor Alan Bartlett, the Chairman of the Corporate Services Policy Advisory Committee, and I'm pleased to welcome you to this meeting of the committee. The meeting will be broadcast live and recorded for playback on the Council's YouTube channel. Will anybody else be recording the proceedings? No. I ask so that people at the meeting will know if this is happening. If the fire alarm sounds during the meeting, please remain seated and members of the Democratic Services team will assess the situation and give further instructions on the evacuation of the building if necessary. Item 1, apologies. I've had apologies from Councillor Hinder. Are there any other apologies? No? Excellent. Okay. Item 2, substitute members. I can't see any substitute members. Item 3, urgent items. There are no urgent updates. So item 4, notification of visiting members. I can't see any visiting members. Item 5, disclosures by members and officers. Are there any disclosures by members or officers? No, excellent. Item 6, disclosures of lobbying. Are there any disclosures of lobbying? No, excellent. Item 7, to consider whether any items should be taken in private because of the possible disclosure of exempt information. I'd like to move that all items be taken in public unless any member of the committee wishes to refer specifically to the information contained within item 13, which is the exempt appendix to item 12, shared revenue and benefit service. Is that agreed? Agreed. Excellent. Item 8, minutes of the meeting held on the 17th of January 2024. Are there any comments on the accuracy of those minutes? No. Okay, so I move that the minutes of the meeting held on the 17th of January 2024 be approved as a correct record and agreed and signed. Is that agreed? Excellent. Item 9, forward plan relating to the committee's terms of reference. Are there any comments on the forward plan, or does the Cabinet member wish to make any comments?
No, I have no extra comments to make, thank you.
No. Any other comments on that? Okay, I move that the forward plan be noted. Is that agreed? Excellent. Item 10, biodiversity and climate change action plan update. I call on Councillor Perry, Cabinet Member for Corporate Services, to introduce the report, if you may, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Members, I'll be reasonably brief. This obviously is a detailed update. It shows the progress to date. I know there's been a lot of discussion on this, and one of the issues, I think the key issues, was to prioritise those items which we can actually do something about, and hopefully I think this report shows the quite considerable progress that has already been made, but there's a lot more to do, clearly. The report sets out what has been achieved. It also has a very interesting table showing our position compared with other councils around, and I think on that basis we're doing pretty well. That doesn't make us complacent, of course, but clearly there is more work to be done. But I mean, I can say in certain areas like decarbonisation of some of our buildings, for instance, particularly Maidstone House, I know that work is going on there, and there's big projects going on there to get going on that particular area. So work is progressing, but I'd like to hand over to James here, who can obviously take you through the report in greater detail. Thank you.
Just to add that the report also includes some new strategic considerations for net zero housing and the transport net zero, and also highlights some of the achievements since the last update in July last year on the Eco Hub, planned solar projects, the tree planting, and the Rural England Prosperity Fund.
Thank you. Councillor Harper.
Yeah, I'd like to thank the officers for this report. There's a lot of useful information in here and a lot of good aspirations and so on. So one can see quite a lot of work's been done, and obviously from when we debated this, must be almost a year ago now, when we asked for a more targeted action plan. Clearly, you can see from your grid at the end that you honed in on a number of points. You just tell that by all the points which aren't in the grid. I've got a number of points and questions on this. So my first one actually is just one of fullness. I think it might have been helpful for us to know, when you look at the previous action plan, which had about 38 individual activities on it, how we'd actually how far we'd actually moved on all of those. Yes, going forward, we're taking a much reduced number of them, but nevertheless, it would have been useful to know. For instance, one of the ones which doesn't appear, and I remember we did discuss, was a simple thing, was about how much recycling facilities are there in council offices, because the last time that came up here we were told not every office actually had recycling facilities, so it would have been useful just to have known if by now that had been achieved. And obviously there are quite a large number of other items, about 30 of them, which we actually don't know whether we did achieve or how far we actually got on them. So I think that would have been useful. Perhaps it may be something the officers, if they have got the information, could just circulate after tonight. But if I move on to some of my more substantive points, starting really on paragraph 2.4, I have no issue with any of those desires in 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. I think they're all ones we would welcome, but what timescales we believe them to be deliverable in. Given that we're now in 2024, I cannot see by 2030 that we'll have net zero housing, we'll have a sustainable transport infrastructure which is able to, a sustainable transport structure in place, given, as we all know, we all live in Maidstone, currently we're one of the highest car travel rates in the whole UK in the borough. So to get down to where we want to be is a massive change. You only have to look at the impact of the rush hour in Maidstone, or typically school travel. I mean, I live opposite the largest collection of schools in the borough, and it's gridlocked twice in a day from 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock, but also from 2:30 through to 4:30. You cannot move along the road I live on, and today I popped over to Allington, and again, when the school was coming out, and this is a primary school and they tend to have local catchments, the number of cars and the number of parents picking up children in cars, assuming that they probably do, a lot of them live in Allington, just struck me as very high. And yes, we need to have a strategy to try to move people and encourage them to go to use other forms of transport. But I'd say, taking our current starting point, to think by 2030, which is only under 6 years away, that we'll have achieved it, I think is admirable, but I think it's unlikely in the real world. I think, again, the develop a park and ride borough EV strategy, yes, we need one, but again, do we really think we can get the whole way by 2030 to having that when petrol vehicles and diesel vehicles will be on the market until 2035 now? So we're not all going to be driving EVs in 2030, and probably quite a lot of people will probably take advantage of the extension to buy another petrol or gas vehicle or hybrid prior to that deadline. I noticed the renewable energy item down there. Yes, we can control that, and there is reference later in the report, and hopefully those schemes come through so we actually can achieve that. But again, on the planning policy, yes, I think it's a good idea that we do have this planning framework, but we're literally in about the next 6 to 8 weeks, I think, going to adopt a new local plan, assuming the council does vote to adopt it. And also, and so given that we're adopting a local plan, unless it's already got the policies of things like solar farms and other items here in it, it won't be until the local plan refresh, presumably in the end of the 2020s coming through, that those sort of policies could actually be adopted. So, I'm not saying I welcome all those things, I'm just a bit concerned on the time scale and the ability to deliver on them from where we are. And I think if we look at the council's own footprint, we highlight two of the buildings which do have some attention to them later, which is the leisure centre. 51% of our emissions are from one building, followed closely by Maidstone House at 17.6%. And I know we applied for that money, referencing 2.11. I just wondered if we've got, and this is a question, because the other things are probably not really more rhetorical, is if we know when we're likely to hear if we've been successful on that bid, because that's the money we need to help augment our resources to actually address those two items. And then on the paragraph 214, when we're looking at the domestic heating, again, I think everybody wants to see the rollout of more heat pumps and so on. Clearly, in longer term, it's a way forward. But it's going to be easier when building regulations insist on all new buildings having heat pumps, because retrofitting them to existing properties, as you say in 215, is sort of an average price of something like 23,000 quid. That could be a lot more, a lot less for people, and that's just to actually get the heat pump in. You then got to have massive work done in terms of insulation, because otherwise heat pumps in existing properties will tend to lower the average temperature. So I don't think anybody would want to be living in houses where they're going to be, you might have a heat pump, you might be carbon neutral, but if you're going to be frozen for time immemorial, that's not going to work. Transportation net zero, again, we're looking at trying to see how we can get a better infrastructure in place. But I remember sitting in here probably 4 years ago at a briefing with Maidstone Council and Kent County Council, actually talking about the infrastructure and how could you do it, all the different aspects of it. And my concern is it's moving at a very slow rate. I say that briefing was probably about 4 years ago. There's big issues, especially for people with no off-street parking. I think we all go around and see lots of electric vehicles where people have their own drives and can get their cars off the road. But I've not seen many places. I've seen one car I can think of in Fan where they they have an electric vehicle and it's parked on the street because they don't have the ability to charge it. So that's a massive issue for people living in terraced housing with no off-street parking. In 2.18, the KC WHIP, I went to the consultations on that, and with some of my colleagues involved with cycling, and we were shocked at what we heard. There were no plans, and Maidstone's not been included as a priority in the KC WHIP. There's only one item which related to Maidstone Borough as a whole, and I think from memory that was a route coming down from the North Downs. Useful if for people who live along that corridor, but probably not that useful for people living throughout the borough. So I think there's a massive amount of work to do with KCC on that to actually have an infrastructure plan available. The Quality Bus Partnership. I just wondered how many meetings there's had, because that was the subject of a question to a council meeting a few months ago. Reading that paragraph, I'm not actually clear if the thing's been set up. There's clearly an aspiration there's going to be a local bus focus group, but do actually have one in Maidstone yet? I know I probably have sounded slightly negative on this, but I do welcome these things. But my concern is just that these things aren't going to be necessarily deliverable by 2030 even, and I know the report the budget report suggests appointing one additional officer, even if we had a fleet of officers, because they require a lot of them a change at a national level, and one we can't input. So, you know, the whole issue about when we move over to EV, the whole issue around heat pumps, as it says, the slow uptake currently across the country. These are major national issues, and whilst we would want to achieve on those, I think we are unlikely to. And I say, looking on the action plan, I'll finish in a second, Chair. Looking on the action plan, a lot of them are green items because it says across the timeline to 2030. So my worry is on these items, when will we know if we've met them or not? Because if we've left ourselves deadlines of just achieving stuff by 2030, you can be in 2029 and it can still be a green item, but not much has been done. So I think that's where I'd like to leave it for now.
Okay, thank you. I believe, are you able to, the question in there was when we find out when we get the money for the Wayton House. Oh, sorry, James or Anna, would you be able to answer?
Yes, I think there was a couple of points in there. One, the first question was around the reduction of the action plan. The action plan is divided up per policy advisory committee, so those actions that are relevant to each committee. So we can circulate a full action plan, but it's also available on papers for the other packs as well. I think specifically around the question around the bid, we haven't had any notification of the timescale for that yet. We don't even have any kind of indicative, so I can't even suggest anything to you. In regards to the strategy, as with all strategies, they have to have a deadline. That doesn't mean that the work stops at the end of the strategy. We would look, like we do with our strategic plan, to what else is still outstanding, what do we need to look or develop, and I would fully imagine that as we get closer to 2030, we would look to do that again, unless members decide that the strategy needs a fuller refresh before then, which you may well do, and we would look to see what our next steps would be. I would agree with you, there are definitely things in here that we are not going to complete by 2030, and the government targets in some cases are to 2050. So we would look to run in time with that, but we are looking at where we can target things now and where we can take action now. And in order to get to something like 2050, we would need to at least have something in motion to ensure that we get there. But if there's anything more specific you wanted else addressed there, then just let me know.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Gooch next and Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Chairman. There's a lot of good news in here, and I'd like to thank the officers for all the hard work that they've put in. I know that you've had a bit of aggravation, if I can call it that, from impatient councillors, myself being amongst them, saying, oh, come on, how are we getting on? We're not going to make it, blah, 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 blah. However, I know that one of the officers did reassure me and explain, had we wanted more frequent updates, that would have been work that officers are doing that they could be spending on doing the actual job, and it would have been a diversion. If we really wanted more than 6 monthly updates, we should have nailed our colours to the mast, laid in the road and insisted. I'm not so sure that it would have done us an awful lot of good. The fact is that officers have worked really hard to come up with this particular update, and I would say well done. I do have one or two comments to make, if I may. I think under 2.4, I might as well work through it easily. The new energy officer role, I have 2 points on that. First of all, I'm afraid I do already get phone calls from companies saying, oh, you're entitled to a grant. If you have extra loft insulation, I just put the phone down. So we may be duplicating something that's already there. So I think we might have to be careful about how we approach that. The other question on this point, the potential new energy officer role, have we actually budgeted for a new officer? When we get to the budget, could you just highlight it for me? Because I've missed it. frankly. So the sustainable integrated transport, I wish, when we're in a state where we have no regular buses, the funding for the whole bus network nationwide, never mind Maidstone, is frankly down the pan. And it's very, very difficult for buses to operate viably, if I can put it that way. Gone are the days when KCC used to subsidise all sorts of things. Gone are the days when we had the good old-fashioned Maidstone Borough District line. Those days are over. Trains go on strike. You can't rely on them. There is a national issue about education, parents driving kids to school. We could have a long argument about, well, I used to walk to school when I was their age and there used to be a bus. No, we're now in the age of parental choice. Parents can choose to send their children wherever. Therefore, they use the car and they then have to dash off to go to work. So school buses are limited, but walking buses are an excellent initiative. But not so much in cold weather. So I do have reservations about that. Developing a borough-wide EV strategy, aiming to that, brilliant. But they must be working. And I read in the papers here that dear Dartford have got loads of them. I'm here to tell you that they don't all work. I ran out of power in an electric car on the motorway because we couldn't refuel, if you like, in Dartford. We also have to make sure that they are publicly accessible. Some of these EV points are at garages that close at night, or they are in a council office that also closes at night. So accessibility and good maintenance is a very key element of the EV strategy. Moving on to the planning policy framework. Excellent idea. Yes, I know we're in the middle of getting our current one, but we're looking ahead 5 years, 10 years. The reservation I have on this is that we're struggling to find gypsy sites. So trying to find a site for solar panels. I live in Hope. It's very, very hard. I know that in my own patch in Teeson, I think a couple of years ago now, fantastic site. Trouble is, it was on the Medway Valley, the slopes of the Medway Valley, and all hell broke loose when it was suggested. But actually, thinking now, and may I be forgiven for saying so, it would be an ideal slot. And actually, this demonstrates how serious all of us are, not just we as councillors, but residents. How serious are we about fighting this dreadful climate change that I know has hit us good and hard? I think, oh yes, if I can jump to, apologies for going on, but this is such a serious issue. On your domestic housing net zero, I did get a bit upset on it, well, angry on this, because I thought, no, I'm sorry, I draw the line at heat pumps. I'll have a solar panel, but I'm not having a heat pump. But are we talking about working with housing providers? I think that would be more achievable, because at the moment we do have a problem with shocking damp in some of the houses, some of the social housing. And I think it would be a wonderful partnership to try to kill both birds with one stone. There's a damp problem. Hey, could we come in and help with improving using heat pumps or solar panels or something? I don't know. I'm not a technical person. I don't understand it. I don't get it. But I do see a little bit more broader thinking, broader working with our housing providers on that. And I think, and I was thinking of groups of houses, yes, blocks of flats I've put there. But I do think that apart from that, I'd like to thank officers for all the hard work that's gone into this. It's been a long time coming for this particular committee. and I wish you luck. Keep going. Please keep doing what you're doing. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. Would James or Alan be able to come back on any phase points?
So I think there was two key questions there. Note your points on the EV strategy, the solar policy approach, and the sustainable integrated transport strategy. But I think there was two questions there about the one about the energy officer and what that role will be doing, and a better explanation on the domestic housing net zero. So if I hand over to James for the more technical on that point.
So in terms of the energy officer, we part of the application process for looking for decarbonising the council's buildings is a long process, it's a technical process, and so having someone in-house with that technical knowledge to do assessments for us and to make it easier to speak that language and seek that funding is a primary point of that job. But also we've now got access to a new net zero scenario software, which is what looking at domestic housing. And so that allows us to see the age of the houses, what kind of upgrades in terms of insulation, or exactly, so we can find hotspots and have strategic ideas. And then that officer again could lead on just awareness campaigns or looking for funding to support residents or solar projects. And also work with other districts in terms of developing solar farms or renewable energy projects. So, yeah, so it'll hopefully cover others. And then in terms of the domestic housing, as I say, this software, officers are just starting to understand it, but it will hopefully open up new avenues of funding and, yeah, absolutely working with housing associations is part of that approach.
Thank you. Councillor Webb, please.
Yes, I've probably been your worst protagonist on this over the last year. I have to say I welcome this report. I think what the way you've approached probably the criticisms that I gave you over the way you set out the plan have been taken on board. What I would say is, having thought about it at great length, I think the role that you've got and the role that your team have got, it's almost like trying to grasp clouds, because there is so much to do. And I fundamentally agree with the appointment of the new officer. They will bring expertise into your team and they will be able to guide the way forward. I do think possibly focusing very heavily on new housing in terms of energy efficiency has got to be the way to raise the percentage across the borough. I think you've got conflict with the housing associations, sorry, not with them, but with the change that's needed, and also with rural housing, where you have the old style of almost, what's the word I'm thinking of here? Well, not Thai cottages, but I mean, the house we live in has no insulation in it because it was built back in the 1700s. So in terms of, and we couldn't possibly put a heat pump into the house because as soon as you put it in, the heat will go straight out. So in that sense, I think, you know, you've got a really hard battle on your hands to get to where you need to get to. But I think in trying to do so, I'm not surprised we're in the top third in Kent, and that's a great positive. Trying to maintain third place is going to be quite difficult, I think. So well done on that. I'm not going to say much more, but I do think in terms of the table that you've got at the back and the way that it's written, I would offer just 2 points. There's a lot of wording in here where you say officers are doing. I don't think in a document like this we need to know that, because we assume that obviously officers are working really hard on this. I think it could be a lot more concise in terms of the actions. And the only question I will ask is on measure 7.2, the carbon footprint dashboard. You've got that likely completion date is across the timeline to 2023. It's got on here that you're on track, but we're in 2024. So is there a you know, a point that should have been added there to say it's likely to be finished by midway through 24? I'm sorry to be so pedantic, but I think if you have a table with dates and actions, you have to meet them, and if you don't meet them, why are you not meeting them? Sorry, thank you.
Sorry, Chairman, can I just butt in? That's an excellent... Do you know, I never spotted that, and I've been poring over this. I didn't spot that. Well, scoring points, you see, that's what it is, Chairman.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, but hang on, I think Anna would like to speak, and
It's just a typo.
Sorry?
It's just a typo. It's already up and working, but there are refinements we need to make to it. There's data that we haven't been able to get into it yet. It should just say till 2030, because we will continue to go back to it and we will continue to improve it and make changes and try and get more data into it. Hands up. Typo.
thank you. I've got Councillor Thompson next, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with much that has been said this evening already, and I will try to work in page order, which doesn't make for particularly interesting listening, but it will be easier for you to follow. Comments that I wish to make. I think this document begs a number of questions. Biodiversity and environmental sustainability is respected. I'm looking for a more useful form of words. There are allusions to improving the health of residents in the long term. That is beginning to go somewhere in the right direction. What Maidstone is going to be like to live in for our descendants needs to be the guiding principle of what we're looking for, not a decision on whether or not our funding comes from within existing budgets. That begs the question as to whether or not our existing budgets are properly constructed. On page 17, we're told the Council's Biodiversity and Climate Action Plan demonstrates compliance with statutory duty. Well, that may well be so. That doesn't make it fit for purpose. There has, as councillors have already pointed out, been change made to the measurements, the publication and the number of targets that have been put here. And I take it that the comments made from the other side earlier in the year were intended constructively, and I think that that's been responded to well. On page 18 at 2.4, we're told that the focus and priorities of the biodiversity and climate change strategy has changed to areas where reducing the largest impacts of the borough's carbon emissions can be made. I'm pleased that remarks that I made earlier in the year have been listened to, but I notice that these are not particularly reflected in the appendix. That data is selected from the previous targets. Items 1 and 2 clearly are the most significant, but let's make no mistake, what we're told here is that progress is looking at how the council can, at item 2 under sustainable integrated transport, to focus on future focused transport innovation workshop for councillors. These are matters of talk, these are matters of writing, these are the matters of planning, they're not matters yet of action. And they reflect the political choices made by this council. They reflect in no way on the excellent work by officers. I agree with councillors who've made clear that those we employ have done their level best to deliver on the job description they've been given, but this document reflects the lack of ambition. Pages 19, 20, 21 are largely reflecting matters of fact of the national picture, or talking about the council's own estate. These progress points are well and good. I have mentioned here already on previous occasion, Mr. Chairman, visits I've made to the depot up at Parkwood and seen the excellent, necessary and laudable improvements that have been made there, but they are tiny in scale compared with the need we face. At the top of 22, In item 220, we're told, again, and this was published by our officer earlier in the year, we know this already, Climate Emergency UK, the recognised assessor at present of UK councils on the actions they've taken towards what is summarised as net zero. I think summarising all of these points as net zero isn't necessarily particularly helpful. There's a wide variety of other mitigation, adaptation and action points that need to be taken on board. Net zero doesn't really capture all of those. But we noted, and I repeat with sympathy, that the work of Maidstone Borough Council and indeed its officers wasn't necessarily fully captured, and indeed might have been inaccurately so described. In discussion with officers earlier in the year before this meeting, we noted that protest and indeed complaint had been made about those things, and I'm yet to get any more significant information about how that process will be improved in the future, and the extent to which our council will be able to set its own path, not dancing to somebody else's tune as to what it is that is recognised as being valid mitigation and adaptation, but things that we justify for ourselves. I think that's vitally important. In planning, on item 229, in planning I noticed in my training recently that we are facing the reality of the mandatory 10% biodiversity net gain, which it tells me in that item 229 that our officers are supporting. We're still yet to find out what, for example, stops an existing landowner cutting down all of the trees on their site, waiting 3 years and then putting in a planning application claiming that they're then going to increase biodiversity and net gain. All of these things amount to meaningless bean counting, Mr. Chairman, if they are not grounded in realistic measurement of where we have been, where we are, what improvements it is that we need to make to actually enhance our environment, our community. I will draw my remarks to close with item 5 on page 24. I find this helpful. Item 5 on 24, it says, responding to the climate emergency is a key corporate risk. Well, indeed so, Mr. Chairman. Ongoing monitoring of the delivery of the action plan is a key mitigation. Well, I agree. I'm not sure that this document really shows the political will that that statement would imply. Indeed, we welcome the annual review. I welcome the comments of other members here. I think that the process that we're going through, Councillor opposite notes some improvements, is all well and good. But the costs associated with achieving net zero and all of the other things are not against a zero base. If we don't do these things, our community will be much the poorer in all manner of ways, not least in terms of our quality of life, the quality of our environment, and least of all then the knock-on effects on the quality of our finances. Realistic targets and timelines, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure that this document really supports our political intentions and ambitions, aside from the work of officers. I want to make that very clear. I'm not talking about them as to what it is that we expect to achieve. The timeline of 2030, as has been noted previously, would be one of those things that we need to look at. I said I was going to finish, Mr. Chairman. I do not see how this document supports the knowledge of the efforts of this council to support climate change and biodiversity improvements in the general public. The people that I meet on the doorstep do not know what this council is doing. They do not understand the ambition to grasp the challenge. They don't know that members are taking it seriously. Councillor Burton told us all in this room when I began that he was holding all 50-something members responsible for delivering on this. It isn't only the responsibility of our good officers at this table, and I do not see that that target has been met, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Did you want to come back on that at all?
I'm taking on board the points, but it felt to me like that was more of a possible recommendation that might come to Cabinet if a recommendation needed to be made.
Okay. We've got Councillor Cannon.
It's a very extensive report, and I just want to focus on one element in the report and in the debate about solar farms. And if we're going forward and looking to create areas for solar farms in our local plan and that sort of area, we do need to consider food security and also the impact of solar farms on biodiversity. They actually can be very bad for biodiversity. So I do worry about how, as a council, we could be in a position saying we want more solar farms because we believe this document exists, but it's not our role to care about food security, for instance. And so actually we should be taking a very balanced view when we look into the solar farm element, and actually we are going to be thinking this is an area that we should be looking at as a council. Then we should also be looking at the other issues as well, like food security and the impact of solar farms on biodiversity as well. So that's just a point that I wanted to make, really.
Thank you very much. Excellent. Okay. Right. Well, Councillor Harper, quickly, please.
Yeah, one of the items actually, I think it was raised by Councillor Webb, suddenly twinkled with me, because I remember when we were sitting here a few weeks ago in Audit Committee, one of the items we asked for a briefing on, for an all-member briefing, was one around the whole issue of carbon accounting, and it had been coming up from reports, I think, presented by the director in terms of the council moving over to carbon accounting to run alongside financial accounting, and the Audit Committee expressed great interest in the possibilities that could give us, and requested that we have an all-member briefing available before the elections. So I'm just a bit, and so that's what the decision was made, to arrange an all-member briefing on that, as the work had largely been finished and was due to be completed during February. So I can't quite see it when I'm looking at the detailed appendix we've got as to what's happened to that, because I say in January we're told we can have an all-member briefing on a subject related to carbon accounting, yet when I look at the things here, the nearest I can see to those types of topics would be 7.2 and I think 9.5, neither of which seem to indicate that what we were told in January at Audit Committee has actually been done. Definitely, if I look on 9.5, it seems to appear, if it's the same issue, the work's due to start in late 2024. So actually, given an all-member briefing before April 2024 would seem to be at odds with what we've got here. And secondly, so that's a question, but secondly, picking up on what the officer said earlier, was they would find perhaps any recommendations from the committee to Cabinet. I'd like to perhaps move an amendment, having listened to the discussion this evening. So that would be to add to item 1, which we've got here, a second item, very simple, the action plans for the items listed in paragraph 2.4, which is on page 18, which is net zero housing, sustainable integrated transport, develop a park and borough-wide EV strategy, renewable energy, planning policy for solar farms, are submitted to committees as soon as possible and no later than July 2024. I think those are, and that would be the amendment I'm requesting. Those are really commendable things, but I think, as Councillor Thompson said, we actually need to know how, and an idea of how we're going to go about getting them delivered, especially since time between now and 2030 is quite pressing. So I don't think it's unreasonable to ask, as I say, for an action plan on how we actually do these things to come to committees, I say no later than July 2024, which gives a couple of cycles in terms of timing for the officers to actually prepare that work, given that it's 5 months away to get it to us.
I believe actually Councillor Thompson got there before you, Councillor Gooch, I think. I'll just ask if the officers want to comment on the if there's any sort of feasibility issues or anything?
Well, my
before
only
we vote?
thought is that we have the election in that period. So whilst it will give officers time to pull something together, doesn't give a huge amount of time for whoever is in cabinet to get to grips with it. But I mean, it's up to you. That was my only thought on it. That may be completely fine.
Okay, thank you. Are you still happy to go ahead with the proposal?
I'd still like the proposal to go ahead. I know we've got elections coming up, but the 2030 deadline doesn't shift 6 months because we've got local elections in May, and we'll also have elections in 2028, won't we? So, yeah, I think the fact that we've got elections is, to some extent, is irrelevant because we've had elections every year for the since 1974, and the council still managed to get stuff done.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, it wasn't I was suggesting it moved back by several years. I was suggesting whether a additional month or so would be more appropriate. I'll take members' guidance on it, but it was for whoever is in power to get to grips and make a decision on what they would recommend or where they are interested. It was more of a political, but you might, can make obviously the recommendation as you see fit, but that was just a suggestion.
Did you want to continue? So, are there any other comments on the motion before we sort of head to a vote? Councillor Webb?
Yeah, I'd like to support the officer's view and move it to December 24, please. You've got to give the officers time to do the work and to work with other colleagues across the council before bringing something forward. I don't think that gives us enough time, them enough time, because they've got to talk to planners, they've got to talk to a whole range of colleagues. So I'd like to offer that amendment to the proposal. Whether you accept that or not, it's entirely up to you. December 24. Yes.
Would members be prepared to compromise and go to September?
We'll go with September, the September cycle.
Would so Councillor Hull, are you?
I'll amend it so that rather than saying July, no later than the September 24 cycle. So that gives the whole period up through and including August when the council's in abeyance to prepare the information.
Would Councillor Webb, would you accept that, or did you still want to sort of propose an amended?
Well, in the light of Councillor Harper's magnanimous change, I'm very happy to leave it as it is.
So, is that agreed, members? Agreed. Excellent. So, lovely. So that's as per the papers, but with the amendment, as Paul Harper suggested. Excellent. Okay, so now we move on to item 11, the medium-term financial strategy 2024 to 2029. And I'd like to call on Councillor Perry, the Cabinet Member for Corporate Services, to introduce this report, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Please forgive me a bit of this one. I'm going to be a bit slow because I'm struggling, as you've probably seen in my Sherlock Holmes Act, I'm struggling a bit to read some of the working papers. So I'm doing this off the top of my head, and hopefully I've got it all there. But if I haven't, Mark will come in, no doubt, will rescue me. First of all, let me say straight away, in some ways, this is the big one, because this is the final budget.
Sorry,
Someone talking?
I do apologise, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to check. I do apologise if this is in any way out of order. Did Councillor Perry get the opportunity to reply to my remarks earlier? I just wished to clarify that.
So, yeah, he's had the opportunity to say. Sorry. Sorry, Councillor Perry.
Okay, I'll start again. This is the big one. It covers the budget, it covers the setting of the council tax, so it covers certain items associated with setting the budget for 24-25. So it is in many ways a very, very important report. Let me say straight away that we do have a balanced budget for 24-25. I think that's a very good starting point. We also have a small surplus in 23-24. And it is only a small surplus. We're talking, I think, 92k. That may sound a lot, but in budgeting terms, that's a mere bagatelle, quite frankly. And I think the officers have done very, very well to keep it as close as that. One of the proposals that you'll see in the paper is how we should treat that particular surplus. And the default position was to just carry it forward. But on reflection, we have a view that we think that this small surplus should be used basically to contribute towards the financial inclusion, which is part of this proposal, which I'll come to a little bit later, and also to allow for a publication of the Borough Insight, which I think is a very useful publication as well. So it's a small thing, but it'll be a recommendation, hopefully, that you can accept as part of this proposal. So coming back to the looking at the settlement itself, it's a little bit in two parts. You've got the referendum limit, which is 3%, and we are proposing that the council tax will increase by 3%, which actually is 16 pence per week. Now, I know that may sound still a lot to some people, but generally speaking, I think it's a relatively modest increase. But to have that increase helps us to keep a sound finances and a sound balanced budget for 24-25. Unlike many of our councils that you'll see around the country, including some in our own illustrious county, that aren't in quite such a good position as we are. So I do put sound finances at a very high priority in making sure when we go forward that we have a very good proposal. Now, the other part of the settlement, the government, is what we call the Gove, literally the Gove guarantee, and he's given us another sort of nearly 4%, little over 3%. And this, I believe, should basically always be used as a one-off. What I would not want it to see is to see it sort of used to bolster up revenue shortfalls and bolstering up the council tax. That seems to me a wrong approach. And so, and given the capital programme, which I'll also come on to a little bit, it is very important that we are in a position to finance the future housing, the affordable housing programme. That's very important, and this is absolutely vital. So predominantly this guarantee, in my view, should be used for that purpose. However, a small amount we are proposing is 198k to go to support the financial inclusion. And this is also very important as well, because it's an important process that we have, and something that we should protect. And so but apart from that, basically, we're looking for the rest to go into the Housing Investment Fund, so that we are helping the future 1,000 houses programme and other capital programmes in the housing area. So they are the two of the big issues I wanted to highlight. The other one I want, it's a fairly small item that's come through, is we call it the Kent Savings. It's a type of, it's not a bank, but it supports people who don't have access to banking arrangements. It's a sort of community resource, We have funded it for £25,000, and we want to extend that to 2032. And it's a minor thing, but it's a useful thing to support, and something I would certainly would want to continue to do so. If you look into the paper itself, you'll see that the 92k surplus we have is something, as I said already, that we want to use for the financial inclusion process for a welfare, basically for a welfare officer fund. So it's and I think that is something that should be supported and is very worthwhile. You'll see there's quite a lot of appendix to this report, and they include how we've arrived at the savings. It sets out the budget book as well, which is the detailed budgeting proposals. It sets out the capital programme, which I think many of you are familiar with. The capital programme, particularly for 24-25, is very important because it links into setting the budget for 24-25 in terms of the capital costs associated with the budget, with the revenue budget. So, for instance, the cost of borrowing, for instance, is reflected in the revenue budget. So that, in turn, is reflected in the council tax. The other items you'll see in the appendix, apart from the capital programme, are the Treasury Management Programme. That has not changed. I think you've seen this before. We follow a very close prudential borrowing code, the SIPFA code, and this is something we carefully manage. We've been very prudent with our borrowing up to date. We will have to borrow a lot more, clearly, in the future, but when looking ahead, you're looking at a program, a capital program. That doesn't mean it's set in tablets of stone, because clearly each capital project we're looked at in terms of its own internal rate of return, its investment appraisal, and positive net present values. All these things come into, plus planning, of course, issues. So there's a whole raft of issues that come into any future capital investment, and they will be part of that before it's finally assessed and becomes an official part of the program. So they're the main things I think I wanted to say about this. The council tax, as I said, is basically a 3% increase. I think this is the right approach. The budget, we have a budget surplus for 23-24, and we have a balanced budget for 24-25. And I think you'll see the savings that are set out in the appendices, basically in Appendix A and B and C. I think I've covered everything, although there's one other thing that's just occurred to me. The part of the Gove, so the settlement that's come through the financial settlement, there is, we can accelerate how we apply council tax to second homes and to basically to those sort of second homes and to empty properties. We can accelerate that by 1 year, but that in the paper, I think it says 1st of April 2024. Actually, it should be 1st of April 2025. That's when it officially comes in. Mark, correct me if I've got that one badly wrong, but I think that is basically it. I think I've covered everything I wanted to say in this. Obviously, if you've got any questions, we'll try and do our best to answer. But I do think it's a very, very good, sound financial position that the authority is in. Future years, a bit more difficult, of course, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Perry. I've got Councillor Webb, please.
I haven't even started yet, Councillor Perry. That's all right. I would like to echo what Councillor Perry has said in his opening remarks, in that this council is exceptionally well managed, led and run, from the chief executive through to all her senior staff, and particularly Mr. Green, Director of Finance. Not so far away from here, there is another council that is trying to manage its ongoing debt. Maidstone Borough Council does not have that problem, and I think that is primarily down to effective leadership and management. So I would like to start by saying well done everybody on that. And I know the Chief Executive is in the room at the moment, and not many people will actually stand up and say well done Mrs. Broom, but I am going to say that because it's not said publicly enough. And I think she is a superb proponent for the borough. Right, moving on to what you said, Councillor Perry, I'm now going to completely flip sides and actually ask some questions. I was a bit confused by what you said about the 92,000. I understand that you don't want to use that as part of a revenue. On 2 points, unless I have misheard you, and knowing my age, that's possibly quite true. But I fundamentally do not agree that the council magazine should be further funded. In talking to many of the residents within my ward, as soon as it comes in through the letterbox, it goes straight in the bin. Well, the point I am making is that not many residents actually open and read it. And I do think that we should be far more careful with using our money in that way. The second point is, could you kindly explain a little bit more about the use, well, sorry, I can't remember the phrasing now. What did he use? The use of the money? Yes, it was that one, wasn't it? Yeah, financial inclusion. I didn't quite understand that. Perhaps if you could explain that a little bit more. And the third point is, a notice on Appendix C, page 51, we are transferring an awful lot to reserves. Now, I'm not against that. I think we do have to be prudent, and I do think that is one of the reasons why the council is so financially secure. But to safeguard some of our residents, part of me believes perhaps we shouldn't have gone for a 3% increase, and we could have used some of those reserves to offset that to help our residents. So it's a question. It's not a statement other than I just need to understand a little bit more, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Webb. Councillor Perry, are you able to answer that, please?
Yeah, sorry, and I'll perhaps push on over to Mark, but the financial inclusion covers it's issues, well, it's supporting people basically, and it covers the issues of food larders and this type of thing that we are already doing, and we want to continue to do. So that is where that particularly comes from. As for the Borough Insight, well, I won't comment on that. I take your point. I mean, some people love it, some people hate it. I've got residents who say to me, "Oh, I'm really looking forward to reading it." So it does work both ways. I think it is a useful way for the council to disseminate useful information. That's where I would come from on it. I get your point. I mean, I think one can certainly make the point both ways on it, but I do know that people do get information out of it. So it does have quite a good use, and it's quite a well presented document, I think. Personally, I'm speaking personally on that one. But Mark, do you want to comment at all on what's been said?
Yes. Mark, could you?
Yep, I'll just expand on what Councillor Perry has said. On the financial inclusion point, I think what was being suggested was that the 92,000 be used in a couple of ways, one for financial inclusion and one to provide a budget for at least one issue of the Borough Insight every year. So far as financial inclusion is concerned, The thing that and another aspect to that is the software that enables that to happen. So we have access to a tracker which allows us to identify families at risk. So that's what's meant by financial inclusion here. So in terms of figures, you'd be looking at 59,000 of the 92 for financial inclusion and 33,000 for one issue per annum of the Borough Insight. So that was the proposal that Councillor Perry was putting forward. If I can just come back to you on your other point about the transfer to reserves on page 51, the way we present the numbers is we start off with a figure of 27 million, but that's our total resources, and then from that, as is alluded to elsewhere in the report, we put money aside for the Housing Investment Fund primarily, and there's a suggestion that it also be used for financial inclusion and food larders, but that's the reason why we're abstracting money, and so that's what that line transfers to reserves refers to.
I mean, financial inclusion, I think, it is an absolute necessity, and thank you for the explanation, both of you. So the slight conflict I have here is that, you know, I think the decision to use the £92,000 and where you wish it to go, I'm happy with that. But the conflict is we might not have a credit going forward from the end of this financial year, and you've said we're employing somebody to help the families, etc., etc. So where's the money coming from to employ that person in 25-26? And I wasn't sure whether that was linked to the Michael Gove monies. So I was hearing Michael Gove money bringing in 3% to do whatever we wish to do. So I'm sorry to ask that question again, but thank you.
So far as the funding for the welfare officer, etc., is concerned, the table in the report setting out how we've basically kind of overshot on our savings on page 41, that shows that in 24-25 we have the money for that additional spending. But you're correct, Councillor Webb, in saying, well, what will happen in 25-26, because we know that we've got a big budget gap in 25-26. So this time next year, we will have to address that, and things like Borough Insight, a welfare officer, all of those kind of things will likely be part of the debate about how we balance the budget. This is quite distinct from what's been called the Gove money, because the proposal in the report is that is used, because it's one-off money, it's used to set up or to add to the Housing Investment Fund, and also some of it be used for financial inclusion to the extent that there is we haven't already set money aside for the welfare officer, we set that 198,000 aside for financial inclusion and support for food larders, on the basis that food larder funding is coming to an end in March, and it's appropriate for the council to look at how they be funded going forward.
Thank you very much for that. I understand that far more than I did when I started asking the question, so you answered it superbly. I'd like to propose actually that part of the £92,000 is not spent on borough pamphlet that goes out, and that is actually removed from the budget. So I'd like to propose that.
I'm happy to second. Oh no, sorry, Councillor Cannon got in there first. So, Councillor Cannon. So apparently we have to vote on not the initial proposal first, and then if that falls, sorry, that's what I thought. Surely that's an amendment, so we would vote on the amendment first. Yeah. Oh, I see. No, sorry, that was wrong. Yeah. So, yeah, no, that is an amendment. So we'll vote on that first. I will, before we have the vote on that, just ask if there are any other comments on the amendment. I think Councillor Harper was first there, so I'll go. Sorry. Yes. Yeah.
I would just like to oppose the amendment. I think the Borough Insight is a very useful tool for the council to talk to our residents. I think it's been noticeable, and people have commented the fact that obviously we've not been able to do them recently. I could see the real benefits of one early in the spring, given, telling people, for instance, about the all-out elections and the fact that everybody apart from Staplehurst, where John represents, is in a new ward to what they used to be. All the voting stations have moved, and I think, if for nothing else, I think one edition of Borough Insight, trying to get that message across to people, the changes coming up, would be incredibly useful going out in March or April. So I would oppose the amendment. Thank you.
Councillor Gooch.
Thank you, Chairman. I would oppose the amendment. I understand that there is money for one more Borough Insight within this financial year. What we're talking about is future. Good, thank you. Whilst I take the point that people don't read it, I happen to issue a parish council newsletter, 1,600 of them, and I'm quite sure that quite a big number of them do go in the recycling bin. But for every one that's recycled, you can bet your bottom dollar that somebody reads it. I get very positive feedback, and I do question residents. Oh, did you read my article? Yes, and it's parish stuff, not political. It's pure local business. I think Councillor Harper's point about the forthcoming elections, the details, who you knew borough, some of us are going to have more than one borough councillor to represent us, how the borough works. It's vital information. I agree. I think the frequency of it should be looked at, but to actually do away with it altogether is a madness. So I am delighted to hear that the Cabinet member is seriously considering including costing of the Borough Insight in that 92 grand. Of course we will look at it again in the future, its frequency, how many pages, how it's distributed it, but please don't let's suddenly shut the door on it. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Right, so I suggest we move to the vote on. Sorry. Are you moving all the recommendations, or we're just moving?
Sorry, no, I wasn't moving all the recommendations. I was making an amendment. This amendment, and nothing more.
Right.
Because other colleagues might want to comment on what the Cabinet member and Director of Finance have said. I've been the only person to talk at the moment.
Okay. So I suggest we vote on this amendment of just this one, and then we'll carry on with the debate afterwards. So all those in favour of the amendment? All those against? So I'm afraid the amendment falls. Right, no, I believe Councillor Cannon was next as we move on to the debate on the rest of it.
Yep. Thank you, Chairman. Just what's the pay position this year? Has this been decided? I haven't seen that clearly in here. Perhaps you can direct me to where it is. The pay at the budget we usually decide what the annual pay award is for staff. Is that?
The way that we account for payroll in the budget is in the detail, what we call the budget book, which starts on page 52. There are what are called section codes. So, for example, 2/3 of the way down on page 52, you'll see something called Democratic Services section. So that is that will include all of the costs of the staff in democratic services. It's not just the pay, it's also things like training and so on, but that's how we account for it. We don't have a single line which covers all the pay. Is that your question, Councillor Cannon?
No, I'll rephrase what my question was, which was last year we voted a sort of, was it 8% pay increase across the board that was funded off from one-off funds, and it was officers recommended we didn't do it. Is that sort of element in this budget yet?
Yes, apologies, Councillor Cannon, I misunderstood your question. If you go to paragraph 230 on page 40, that sets out the assumptions about pay within the budget. So it's effectively a 5% increase.
So that's a 5% increase on the additional pay from last year. Yeah, because that's now built into the pay. So I'm just starting to think that, you know, inflation has actually calmed down, and the impacts of inflation are also not necessarily, you know, we had, for example, we had a lot of fuel inflation, but then we've also had a lot of working from home from staff, and I do think that when we're in a situation where residents are having a tough time, we're increasing their tax, and we're sort of again giving a good pay award, and actually we should be moving to a multi-year settlement on pay rather than every year. We're putting another 5% on a generous increase last year as well, while also, you know, we've got this looming budget gap, and we're talking about things like cutting services that other members find valuable. And I just feel that we should be perhaps a bit more restrained, and considering the residents that are paying taxes and are paying for all of this. So that's the sort of point that I want to make, really.
Thank you, Councillor Cannon. Are there any other comments on that point? Of Councillor Harper.
Thank you, Chair. I feel I just need to respond to the point Councillor Cannon made in terms of the pay award. I think, and where I work, we're paid on the national local government pay scales, and yes, this year the pay has actually been higher than it had been previous years, but there have been lots of years over the last decade when there's been sub-inflation pay awards. I can remember we've had years of like 1% and 2% pay awards when inflation's been running at 3 or 4%, if not more. And obviously over the last couple of years, inflation's been very high. Yes, you're right, it is coming down now, you know, and everyone would be grateful for that. But local authority pay has fallen well behind the market rates for a similar type of work. And when we go to different committees, perhaps in this one, but I'm sure even the staff working for this committee, we're finding that trying to recruit and retain staff becomes more difficult. I mentioned earlier I'm on the audit committee, and I know our internal audit division, which is part of the Mid-Kent Services, has suffered year on year where they haven't been able to recruit because the local government pay rates have not been competitive in the sector, and so people are choosing not to work for local councils. So I think if we do it, and it's 5% is fairly modest, 5% pay award, as it says there, plus allowing an extra percent for increments, which people get contractually as you move up a pay scale, as you get more experience, I don't think is unreasonable in where we are moving forward. Yes, ultimately it'll be quite a lot of money, but if we don't do this, we'll end up having a lot more money spent on agency work or just not getting information because there just aren't the staff to do the work for the council. So I just felt I wanted to correct that what I could think is perhaps a misunderstanding. One of the first things I wanted to do is actually, again, recommend and commend the officers for the work they've done in this report. It's very long, but it has a lot. There's a lot of information here set out in a reasonably easy to follow flow, which leads us well onto the recommendations we have before us. So I don't know, perhaps whether we should add as an amendment that we do thank the officers for this report, for the way it's been presented, and I do think, picking up on Simon's point, we should actually commend our officers for running the authority and advising members over the years. I mean, I've been on Maidstone since 2014, and every year we've set a balanced budget in a sensible way, in a collegiate way, working across all parties, whether there's been a majority party or not, to ensure that our finances as an authority are on a sound footing. And we only have to listen to the national press almost on a daily basis to hear of one authority teetering on on the brink of bankruptcy, or another one. Yet we're sitting here with a fairly sound base, and I'm sure even as we go into the year after next, in 25-26, which will be very challenging, clearly, that if we apply the sort of methods of working we've done over the last few years through that process, we will come out at the end of even another year of budgets in a relatively good position in terms of having a balanced budget. I just wanted to check out all the requests John's asked us to do this evening in the current recommendations. Because I couldn't, because John mentioned a number of things which I think most of us supported, but I couldn't, looking at the actual recommendations, unless they're sort of squirreled away in one of the various appendices, I wasn't clear whether all those items are actually covered by what we've got before us. I don't know if Mark would be able to comment on that before I go on.
Just in terms of the items that Councillor Perry mentioned, there will need to be an additional recommendation to deal with the utilisation of the 92,000, and I can suggest a wording for that. And also, to pick up the point Councillor Perry made, I'd suggest that members note the amendment in relation to Kent Savers to their loan, and to correct what's in recommendation 14 about the implementation date for the changes to second homes and empty homes.
Thank you for that, Mark. I think we'd all find it useful if perhaps with our clerk, if you could work out the precise wording we need to do to reflect those, and I'd be more than happy once you've got it to move that as a recommendation. I think if I just go back, there's ironically in paragraph 2.3 where it talked about the pay award, there's obviously a typo, third line from the bottom. Whilst our chief executive may sometimes like the idea of being perhaps in charge of the cabinet, it should be chief executive rather than chief cabinet, as has been written on the papers. I think it's really important that we do, and I've said this for the last couple of years since we embarked on the 1,000 affordable homes, to build up that reserve so that we've got the £50,000 subsidy per house as described here, building up at a good rate and as much as we can afford. And I note on page 140, that at the moment we're looking at that figure should actually hopefully get up by the end of the next financial year up to just under £12 million. And I think that's something we should all be welcoming, because if we don't build this up as fast as rate as we can do, we're going to fail to deliver 1,000 affordable homes. So that's, I think, when you looked at the transfer on one of the earlier pages referred to, is where that money's going to. So we're using all the Go bonus and new homes and other bits to actually go into that reserve, which is, I say, something which I think is a fundamental part of the budget and the approach we've got here. On the capital, I agree with John that it's going to be really important as we move forward to measure every item very clearly. There's a lot of items there, most of which I would actually support, and I'm sure most people probably obviously would do, because we've been through this committee before. But we do have to make sure that when you look at page 96 on table 8, paragraph 4.12, that if we were to not apply the sort of strategy we've talked about, which is, you know, making an internal rate of return, the net present value and so on, and effectively generating the income to pay for the debt any items incurring, yes, we could suddenly find by 2028-29 that just 41% of our revenue money would be needed to finance the level of debt. But I'm sure, and I can't, obviously none of us know who's going to be on the council when we get up to that stage. I think it's unlikely. I think if Maidstone continues with the approach we're working to adopt in terms of treasury management and the capital programme, that we will be pushing forward mainly schemes which are generating their own cash to pay for the debt servicing. And if we work on that basis, then when we get to 28-29, hopefully debt won't be costing us any more proportionate to our total line than it is now. But we have to hope that our successors, or any of us who remain on the council, would ensure that they keep to those sort of policies. And there's another typo I spotted here. I think it's just worth changing before we get up to full council. On page 144, in that table, at the top, the year numbering's gone a bit askew. So the first column's fine and the last column's fine, but all the other year numbers are slightly out. So it should obviously be 24-25, and then 25-26, 26-27, and 27-28. And when I first looked at it, I thought for a minute, I knew we had to make £900,000 of savings. And I was suddenly thinking, where's the other £4.5 million come from? But obviously, when I looked at it again, I realised that's what we've got to identify next year. So perhaps another question for Mark would be, picking up on the point about second homes and the ability to double the charge on vacant second homes from April 2025, whether you've any idea of the type of additional income that may generate for us at that stage. Because obviously any extra money that generated would hopefully be counted, you know, against the £4.5 million.
So far as those changes are concerned, the impact unfortunately is quite modest. Remember that of the council tax we collect, we only retain about 15% of that. So you're talking tens of thousands rather than amounts that would make a big difference.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Gooch next, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I will join with my colleague in commending the officers for this comprehensive batch of information, clearly set out, clearly understandable. It's there for all to see, and thank you very much indeed for that. It's most helpful, and I know that I'm proud that Maidstone has a very sound financial procedure, if I can put it that way. But of course, we don't have adult social care, social services or education. However, we do have the impact of our when our residents are suffering because of any withdrawal or reduction in those services. So that also needs to be taken into account. I do have just one question, please. On page 57, I've now closed my papers. I was looking at bereavement services and the estimated expenditure for next year and probably forthcoming years. It sounds a very unkind and inappropriate thing to say, but actually we've done very well with bereavement services because of the effect of COVID. Our income has been very, very good indeed. However, people passing away, they are almost now back to pre-COVID levels. But it doesn't look to me as if that's been taken account of in the estimate. And to me, that's the only worrying bit in all this paperwork. Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Gooch. If members look at the top of page 57, which is what you're alluding to, the revised estimate for net income for bereavement services in 23-24 is 984,000. We are actually expecting, as you've suggested, a reduction in income in 24-25. So that 984 goes down to 941. And that's exactly what you're saying, that we are expecting income to go down, albeit we're still generating a lot of income from that service, but whereas most of our income lines are going up by 5% or so to allow for inflation, this one is actually going down.
It's the one
Thank you. Are there any other comments? So can we move to the... yes.
I can clarify the reading on that. Right. First time using this, you can tell. So I've got the additional recommendations here that the committee recommends to Cabinet that it utilises the £92,000 budget surplus referenced in paragraph 2.34 for financial inclusion. This includes welfare officer and dashboard for tracking low-income families at £59,000 and at least one issue per annum of the Borough Insight at £33,000. And then an additional recommendation to note an amendment to the repayment date for loan to Kent Savers referenced on page 97 be changed from 2027 to 2032.
Oh, hang on. I've pressed something here.
Whether we should also move to thank the officers directly from the committee for the work they put in terms of taking the budget process all the way through from the summer to now, and the fact that all the paperwork has been easy to follow for members of this committee. And I think that, you know, given the amount of work put in, I think we should add a special vote of thanks to.
Okay. Are you happy, as a seconder, Councillor Webb, are you happy with... Is that agreed, members? Agreed. Excellent. Lovely. Now we move on to item 12, Shared Revenue and Benefit Service, consideration of expansion, and I'd like to call on Councillor Perry to introduce this report, please.
Thank you, Chairman, members. Before I start, I'd just like to add my own personal thanks to Mark Green and his team. They're a pleasure to work with, I can say that, and we've got a great set of officers, and I'm very proud to be the Cabinet member who works with them, so they've done a great job. I think we should all be very pleased. So I just wanted to say that, because I know you've all said it, and thank you very much for saying it as well. Back to agenda item 12. This has been around for a couple of years. Swale, it was proposed Swale to join the services that's currently provided for Maidstone and for Tunbridge Wells, so to make the three councils involved. Quite a lot of discussion has already taken place on this. And quite frankly, it's in my view, it's a pretty well, dare I say this, a fairly open and shut case. Actually, I think the proposal now before you is supported. Swale have already approved it, I gather, and it's certainly been discussed in our cabinet as well. I think there's a general feeling of support for this. There are certainly financial benefits that I think you can see in the paper, and they're not insignificant, to be honest. And also the fact is that by working together on this basis, there's sort of benefits of scale as well in terms of technology benefits, working together and feeding off each other, which I think is general benefit over and above the financial benefits. I know there are yellow pages attached to this, but I do believe that it's a very, very straightforward proposal that I believe should be supported. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Perry. I'm happy to propose that from the chair. Okay, so are there any other comments on it before we head to the vote? Yeah.
I wondered whether we could turn poacher term gamekeeper, and perhaps, for instance, I look in paragraph 2.2, and I just think it's quite nice, I'm sure, for Dartford and Sevenoaks to have joint services, but I think they're the two smallest authorities in Kent by far, and I just wondered perhaps if, assuming that we merge with Swale, whether perhaps we might approach them to see if they may be interested in joining Mid-Kent services to get greater economies of scale.
Yeah, it is. Do you want to quickly sort of comment on that, and then we'll move on?
Thank you. That's a really interesting point. We have, I think there's a paragraph in the business case saying that we could expand our services. I'd want to bring Swale in first and get that up and running really well. But yeah, it is a good point that they use the same computer software as us. So that is something that we could look at in the future.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Goochling.
Yes, please. Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to thank officers. I know we've been working in this direction of trying to bring in districts so that we can all work more efficiently. But I can remember it was a couple of years ago that we were talking about new software to help people at the front line of Revs and Bens to try to process applications quicker and all that sort of thing. And it's really good to see that it's come to fruition. I think you've put an awful lot of work into this, and I just think that you deserve the thanks of members round the table, and I thoroughly commend the recommendation to the Cabinet member. But thank you very much indeed. It's well set out, well justified, huge amount of work, brilliant job. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other comments on this? No. Okay. Is that agreed, members?
Agreed.
Agreed. Excellent. So, yeah, once again, thank you for your work and everything you've done. And that is the close of the meeting. So I now declare this meeting closed. And thank you all for your time.
Thank you.